Good afternoon, this is Daniel here with Cops and Cons TV. I just want to welcome everyone to our weekly live show. We're going to get into and break down just some of the most important and interesting issues in policing and stories when it comes to news and crime. There was so much that happened this week, so we got a lot of stories this week to get through. While I'm going through some of these stories and some of these incidents that happened, if you have any questions or comments, or you have a different take on some of the things that we're going to talk about, make sure you put it in the chat so I can address it and we can kind of go back and forth a little bit. Again, just want to appreciate everybody being here. If you haven't already, please go and subscribe to our channel at Cops and Cons TV so you know exactly when all of our new videos come out and so you know exactly when we're going to do this live show. Usually we do it on Fridays at 12 o'clock Mountain Time. Again, my name's Daniel. If you want to go ahead and follow me on social media at Police Law News, just about everywhere. Okay, so let's see. We did ask where everyone's from. We got someone from Delaware, from Australia, Virginia, Rhode Island. All right, greetings from California. Yeah, there are absolutely a lot of topics to talk about and get through today. And the first one that I want to start with is pretty much the biggest news that has hit, everything from sports media to Fox to CNN. It's essentially everywhere because it's the biggest story the last 24, 48 hours. And it's the WNBA star, Brittany Griner, was freed yesterday. Right before the show, it looks like she had landed in San Antonio and she's being checked out on a military base. Now, I'm going to be real honest. I love sports. I follow professional sports, but I don't follow college sports and I don't follow the WNBA. So before all this happened, I had no idea who Brittany Griner was, and my guess is a lot of people are in that same category. But here's what happened with Brittany Griner. So she plays in the WNBA, but in the offseason, in order to make extra money, a lot of the really popular WNBA stars, they go overseas and they play in different leagues. And a lot of time, they can actually make more money playing in Russia or Turkey or Spain or some of these other countries. They can make more money doing that than Sergeant George, thank you so much. So they can actually make more money doing that than they do playing in the WNBA. So Brittany Griner, for several years, she has gone to Russia and played there in the offseason. Well, this time when she was going to Russia to play, she had some cannabis hashish oil in a vape pen, and she was stopped by airport security or whatever the Russian version of the police or customs are. She was taken into custody. She went to trial. But, I was looking up some stats because I was curious, well, what does it really mean to go to trial in Russia? And according to NPR, people who go to trial in Russia over the last 20 years, they have a 97% conviction rate. And the prosecutors there just must be unbelievable. So you know that once you go to trial, you're going to be found guilty. So Brittany Griner was found guilty, and she was sentenced to 9 years in what is really like a hard labor camp. So she was actually sent to like this penal colony within the last couple weeks. However, President Biden, the State Department, they were able to work out a deal where essentially there was a prisoner swap. And they had talked about this for a really long time, probably about 6 months or longer, because Brittany Griner's been there for 10 months. So pretty much they've been talking about this prisoner swap for about 10 months now. So what happened is there was an exchange for Victor Bout. And Victor Bout, he was a Russian arms dealer, and his nickname was the Merchant of Death. So we traded, and he was convicted in the United States and not in the type of court where there's a 97% conviction rate, but he was convicted in the United States and sentenced to 25 years in jail. So the United States traded the Merchant of Death, Victor Bout, for Brittany Griner. There was an exchange in Dubai yesterday. So let's dive into this a little more. So I think the first thing that we have to say is that no matter what side of the political aisle you're on or what WNBA team you follow or don't, you probably don't. No matter what that happens to be, being arrested for something like this is absolutely ridiculous. Not only is it ridiculous to be arrested for something like this, but then to have to serve 9 years in jail for a little bit of hashish oil. I think we can all look and be objective and say that's silly. But we also have to say, Well, these are the laws of another country. So you have to follow the laws of the country that you're in. It isn't like, she was rounded up here and arrested for that when it really wasn't against the law. No, these are the laws in Russia. And yes, they are absolutely ridiculous, but those are the laws that they're able to have. So there's been a lot of politicians and sports figures and people in the media saying that she's being unlawfully detained or illegally detained. Well, not according to Russian law. According to Russian law, she broke their law. So the idea of her being illegally detained, that really isn't a thing. That's not true. Immorally detained? Sure. Held as a pawn so they could do this prisoner exchange to get back the merchant of death? Absolutely. And so when it comes to it, a lot of people, they aren't really upset that Brittany Griner is home free. Anytime there's an American situation like this where people can get them back, a lot of people aren't that upset. But one of the things that happened here that made this so much more complicated is this happened right on the eve, right before Russia invaded Ukraine. So right before it went to war with Ukraine, this is when this happened, and that's what made this all the more complicated. Now, in talks, I think a lot of people maybe would have been a little more okay with is that in talks and in the media, there's been speculation that not only were the United States State Department going to try to get back Brittany Griner, but other people who've been in prison in Russia for longer periods of time. The first one is Paul Whelan. So Paul Whelan he was a Marine, and he was last year Paul Whelan, in 2018, he was arrested and prosecuted in Russia for espionage charges that he says are just ridiculous charges. And he was sentenced to 16 years in jail for that. So he's been in prison for about 4 years now. So a lot of people thought that in this prisoner exchange, this would be a chance to get back Paul Whelan. Well, that didn't happen. Paul Whelan's family actually went on the news, and they really said the only thing that they can say, probably what they're thinking is, hey, this guy, he served our country. He didn't do these crimes, and he's actually been there, 3 years longer than Brittany Griner. You're going to let him stay there, but you're going to do what you can to get her out. So that's probably what his family is thinking, but that's not what they said, obviously, because President Biden is still the president. So you have to say these kinds of things. So they were well coached, and their public statement is that they were extremely happy that Brittany Griner is going to be able to go home to her family, and we hope that the State Department doesn't forget about Paul Whelan. So that was, if you want President Biden, the State Department, to try to do something soon, that was the right thing to say, though that probably wasn't honestly how they're feeling. Also, there's someone else who's been held in Russia. His name is Mark Fogel, and I actually think that there's more of a connection with Mark Fogel than there is with Brittany Griner, and that's because of the underlying criminal charges and what they were convicted of. So Mark Fogel was convicted last year for having 17 grams of medical marijuana for a spine condition that he has. He was convicted last year for this in Russia. He's a teacher who's been over in Russia for quite a long time, and he was sentenced to 14 years in jail. So he was actually convicted just about a year before Brittany Griner was arrested. So this is another example of an individual who's, held for similar charges, has been there longer, yet Brittany Griner is the one who gets out. And, people who like to make comments about this is like LeBron James. So he says the most ridiculous things, and one of the things he said when Brittany Griner was first arrested, he said, if it was me, LeBron James, and I was over there, they would have gotten me out already. So he said that within the first 30 days that Brittany Griner was there. Essentially, he's trying to make this woke argument saying that because she's a black lesbian female, that's the reason why the United States government isn't getting them out. Of course, not realizing that there were at least 2 white, straight, heterosexual males who are there and who Brittany Griner actually got out before. So, the idea that she's a black lesbian female and that she's a sports athlete, that's where her privilege comes from, and that's why she was released before these other hostages. So I just want to put that out there because that is what happened exactly in the last couple days. And, happy birthday. Thank you so much. Yeah, I just turned 40 this week, so I know I have a lot of gray hair, but yeah, 40. Thank you. And I should also say that when it comes to the Brittany Griner case, one of the mercenaries that the United States uses a lot of the time is this negotiator, Bill Richardson. He was the former governor of New Mexico, and he was the energy secretary, I believe, under Obama. So he did have, maybe it wasn't Obama, maybe it was before that, but he was energy secretary at some point, and he was the governor of New Mexico. He helps a lot in cases like this was trying to get out and negotiate for people getting out of North Korea and Russia. So Bill Richardson did help out. And it looks like he was the energy secretary under Clinton, and then he became the New Mexico governor for 2 terms. He used to call him Big Bill. So that's the Brittany Griner story. So, she's home. That's great. You don't want any Americans to be stuck over there in Russia. But it's just a lot of people are irritated because there's other people who have been there longer. A lot of people think, and I'm one of them, then when it comes to hostage situations like this, that you should really treat it like a college bar on a Friday night. Like first in, first out. Like there is no skipping in line. So there's a lot of that sentiment out there. Next case I want to talk about is Antonio Brown. So we hit on this last week. And while we went on the air last week, I kind of teased that, hey, at any moment now, Antonio Brown is the former Pittsburgh Steelers wide receiver who was involved in a domestic incident, and he barricaded himself in his home, and Tampa police were trying to get him out. But what happened is that this happened essentially last Thursday evening at about 7 o'clock at night. So, maybe 15 hours or so before we went live here. So, really we were kind of thinking, well, listen, at any moment, either the police are going to burst in there or Antonio Brown is just going to give up after 15 hours and finally come out. But here we are a week later. Antonio Brown is still holed up in his house. Police have a warrant for battery on a household member, which is a misdemeanor charge. Apparently, they don't have like a SWAT team sitting out there anymore, but they have made multiple attempts in order to try to get him to come out and surrender. He's refusing because he doesn't want to go to jail, and he also isn't. He is there, but there still is a police presence outside of his house. And I just want to say that yes, the first 2 stories that we went over were sports related. This isn't a sports channel. This is still about breaking down the most interesting stories and news in policing. Let's see. I'll believe everything. We trade an international arms dealer and close friend of Putin and his oligarch buddies for a doper. Yeah, so that's a lot of the sentiment. That's what we hear a lot. Let's see. Any other comments about Brittany Griner? No other comments. I'll believe everybody. Let her try that in Saudi Arabia. Yeah, that would be difficult. Yeah, I mean, so a lot of people have been comparing this trade to the Victor Boot for Brittany Griner. A lot of people have been comparing that to a trade that like the Denver Broncos made for a quarterback. So so the next case that I want to talk about. So this happened in Phoenix. The first 2 stories are more not silly, but they're kind of lighthearted sports stories. So this incident in Phoenix, this isn't real lighthearted. This is a serious case that we need to talk about. So it happened back in October, on October 27th in Phoenix. Here's what happened. There's a 38-year-old guy named Harry Denman, and 2 Phoenix police officers went into a convenience store, a gas station, and as they walked out, 38-year-old Mr. Denman started talking to the police officers. This is on security camera video, and we're going to go ahead and link the video for the body cam footage and the surveillance video. But he started to talk to the police officers, and it seemed friendly. It didn't seem like there was anything strange about it. The police officers got in their police vehicles, they backed out of the parking space, and they were actually en route to another call for service. As they were backing out into the parking space, for some reason, and seemingly for absolutely no reason, Mr. Denman pulled out a gun, and he started to shoot the gun towards the police cars. The first shot that he fired hit the ground, and the second shot that he fired, the first shot hit the ground, and the second shot that he fired actually went and struck the police car on the driver's side. So the light that the police have, the spotlight and the door frame, that's where the bullet struck. So obviously the police officers were incredibly nervous about this, and it's a jarring thing to be shot at. So what happened was the police officers got out of their car, and at that point, what happened is the individual, Mr. Denman, he ran back into the convenience store. Police officers chased him into the convenience store, and at that point, he pretty much gave up. He went down on his knees, he put his hands up, and at least in his hands, you weren't able to see any type of gun or firearm or weapon in his hands. However, the police officers, they were a little excessive. They placed him in handcuffs. They were pointing guns at him. Even once he was in handcuffs, they were pretty much pointing the gun right up to his body and his head. They said things to the effect of. don't fucking shoot at us, I'll blow your head off. And, you know, when the police officers made those comments, Denman said, I wasn't trying to shoot at you, I was trying to shoot over you, which is really strange. However, a couple times while Mr. Denman was in handcuffs, the police officers did punch him and hit him while he was in handcuffs. Not only was this recorded on their own body camera and store surveillance video, but the clerk who was right there was recording this on his cell phone. So I think you know what happens next, even though the individual was arrested for, you know, attempted murder on a police officer because of the claims of excessive force and the body camera footage that's out there. Both officers have been on paid leave. There's an internal affairs investigation. So this is one of those things where police officers are human, and any human, no matter who they are, you can imagine a situation where if you actually get shot at, that you're going to be a little irritated. I mean, that's a jarring thing to happen to anyone. So the police officers obviously weren't in their complete right mind when they did this, meaning like it's reasonable for anyone to be upset and angry and have adrenaline going. However, it's just so important to remember that now someone like this who just tried to kill you, now they might lose their jobs over this because of the allegations of excessive force. So the individual is still under arrest, he's still being prosecuted, but the police officers have been put on leave. It's a good rule, no matter what the circumstances is, that once the handcuffs go on, the fight's over. That's it. It doesn't matter if there's cameras, if there's not cameras. Once someone's in handcuffs, the fight is absolutely over. So that's the case in Phoenix. And the reason why I'm talking about it now is that this did happen in October. However, now the body cam footage and some of these revelations just came out from the Phoenix Police Department. Let's see. Sergeant George, Harry Denman was mentioning how he had no resentments towards the police. Yeah, I mean, which is strange. Again, Sergeant George, you're 100% right, because like the initial interaction was normal. It was a normal interaction that they had. Nothing seemed strange. He didn't swear at the officers. They didn't yell at him. There wasn't any kind of an argument before this happened. And then he starts shooting at the police car. And his explanation is, it's not like, oh, hey, this was an accident or fuck you guys. I mean, his explanation was, I was trying to shoot over you, which is absolutely strange. So it's unknown right now if there's any kind of a mental health part to this, or if there's narcotics on board, but it's a very strange thing to happen. Typically, that's not what police officers are going to get when they have a normal interaction with someone, getting their cars leave. Those people typically don't fire at them. Let's see, Phoenix Police Chief Michael Sullivan, he did give kind of a statement. He said, at the time of the incident occurred, I promised a complete and thorough investigation, and he said the investigation has been turned over to the DA's office with a recommendation for charges against the police officer. So not only is there a administrative investigation, but also criminal investigation against the police officers for excessive force. So, so that's the case in Phoenix, Arizona. We'll keep you updated on that. If those police officers happen to be charged, we will go ahead and talk about that. We put out a video earlier this week, another case in Tampa Bay. I know someone in here mentioned on Tampa Bay. Oh, let's see, Brian Tampa says, I hear the Antonio Brown story every day on the Tampa news. Well, there's a lot of Tampa news today. So what happened in Tampa Bay is also they had their police chief resign. So we're going to link the video to it, but we put up a video this week. We're going to play it here for you. But we put up a video this week about the Tampa Bay police chief getting pulled over. So here's what happened. So the Tampa Bay police chief is a female police chief. Her name is Mary O'Connor, and she is the passenger in a golf cart. Her husband was the one driving the golf cart, and they live and they own property in this like gated community where it's a private community. So essentially, if it's private property, typical normal traffic laws just don't really apply, right? So these golf carts, they're not registered, they don't have license plates or anything like that. So what happened was, for some reason, they left the private gated community and her husband started to drive around outside in the real community, like on an actual public street. Well, he didn't have any kind of a registration or license plate, so the couple were pulled over. Once they were pulled over, almost immediately she identifies herself. She identifies herself as the chief of police of Tampa. She shows her badge, and she says something to the effect of, "I'm hoping you'll just let us go tonight." The officer, the deputy who did the traffic stop said, the reason that he stopped him is that there's been a lot of complaints about this exact kind of thing. People taking these vehicles that are just meant to be on private property because they're not registered onto the public property, and that's why. Now, worst case scenario, let's walk this down the path of worst case scenario. If the officer did take any kind of enforcement action, it would have been a traffic ticket. This isn't an arrestable offense. He's not going to tow the golf cart. Like, this is a traffic ticket, and it's not even the chief of a very cheap traffic ticket probably, and it's not even the chief of police who would have gotten the traffic ticket. So the type of bad press that would have gotten is that her husband got a ticket for driving this golf cart in an area where it's supposed to be registered and outside the private property. That just isn't a big deal. But what happened is because she identified herself, she said who she was. She said, "I hope you'll let us go tonight." Also, during the contact, she gave the officer her card and said, "If you need anything, seriously, if you need anything, call me." So the officer, the police chief and her husband did not get any traffic tickets, and the body cam footage came out. So again, if you want to watch the full body cam footage, definitely go to Cops and Cons TV and check out our body cam footage of the whole interaction from earlier this week, and let us know what you think. But when this happened, a lot of people were commenting and saying things such as, "I don't see why this is a big deal." It didn't seem like we've all seen situations where police officers commit serious crimes, and after a serious crime is committed, then they try to use their position and their badge to get out of it. But this is such a minor thing, and she wasn't even the one who was driving, so people kept saying, this isn't a big deal. Why is this even on, national news? Well, the reason, and it is a big deal, it's such a big deal, she actually resigned just about the day after we put the body camera footage up. So the mayor announced that Chief Mary O'Connell resigned from her position. It's also been reported that, Mary O'Connell, she, again, chief of police of Tampa Bay, which is a pretty large police department, they're typically not just going to hire anyone to be a chief of police for someone like that in that agency, but she actually has kind of a strange history. So when she was a rookie with the Tampa Bay Police Department over 30 years ago, she was pulled over. Again, this is like a theme here, multiple decades apart, but she was pulled over while she was pulled over as a rookie off duty, and while she was pulled over, she got into a thing with the officer. She ended up battering the officer there, and she was arrested for resisting arrest and disorderly conduct over 30 years ago when she was fired from the Tampa Bay Police Department. At some point, she was reinstated as a Tampa Bay cop, and then, from that point on, for 30 years, she made it all the way to chief of police and had a pretty reasonable career and a good career as far as anyone can tell until this happened. So she has resigned from the police department, and this is one of those stories where people just didn't think it was going to be a big deal, but yeah, this ended up being a huge deal. Anytime a police chief has to resign because of a scandal or something like that, it's a big deal. And Tampa Bay is a pretty large city, so yeah, no, this is an absolute big deal. That's why we put the body camera footage up. So why don't you go and watch that body camera footage, then comment and let us know if you think what she did was over the line or not. Obviously, the residents and the city councilors and the mayor of Florida thought so, but I'm curious what your thoughts are on this. Let's see if we have any comments on that. Let's see. Brian W., there was definitely professional courtesy, but it is not something you ever ask for. That was bad, chief. Yeah, so that's, you don't ever ask for it. Now, a lot of times what police officers do, they'll say something to the effect of if they're pulled over outside their jurisdiction. A lot of times what police officers do, and what I've had happen, is that, they'll say, "Hey, just so you know, I have a firearm on me. I am a police officer." So that's usually what happens. They'll say something like that. Well, they mention that they're a police officer kind of in a roundabout way. So that isn't what she did. Let's see. Any more comments on this case? Sergeant George, many YouTubers were talking about this. The fact that the woman was trying to badge her way out was dumb, to say the absolute least. Yeah, it absolutely was dumb because this is the traffic ticket. So who knows how, my guess is she makes well over six figures in mid six figures working as a police chief. So to give that up for a, less than $100 traffic ticket that wasn't even hers seems a little silly. And this next case also happens in Florida. A lot of cases in Florida, but this one isn't in Tampa. So, We actually have 2 more Florida stories that are coming up, but this case is actually just an awful case, and I'm sure everyone has heard about it. So this happened in Brevard County, Florida. There's a Brevard County Sheriff's deputy named Austin Walsh. Austin Walsh, he's a young police officer, 23 years old. He's a sheriff's deputy. He's a roommate with another police officer, Andrew Lawson. They were playing earlier this week. They were playing video games while they were playing. Just one thing. Looks like Chief Mary O'Connell makes about $192,000 a year. So that's what she gave up for a $100 traffic ticket or so. Okay, so this next case in Brevard County, sheriff's deputy off-duty 23-year-old new police officer Austin Walsh has a roommate who's also an off-duty police officer, Andrew Lawson. And they were doing what a lot of 23-year-old off-duty police officers do. They were playing video games. They took a break from playing video games, and they were kind of standing in the kitchen. And while they were standing there talking, for some reason, Andrew Lawson pulled out a gun that he thought was unloaded, pointed it at Austin Walsh, his best friend and his roommate, pulled the trigger. The firearm wasn't unloaded. He shot him one time, and he died. He was killed. There's an absolutely crazy thing. Almost immediately, Andrew Lawson called 911, tried to get medics there, but the shot was such that Austin Walsh died almost immediately. Police officers came, obviously there was an investigation, and Lawson was arrested, and he was charged with manslaughter with a firearm. Manslaughter, so when it comes to these criminal charges, I know most people know this, there's typically 2 different tracks when it comes to homicide type charges. So there's murder and there's manslaughter. And really the way it comes down to is you have to think about intent. If you do something on purpose, intent, that's going down the murder track. If you do something on accident or you weren't intending a death to occur, that's typically when you're going to go down the manslaughter track. So, manslaughter. So he was charged with manslaughter. And you know what? I think that the criminal charges are absolutely appropriate. I mean, his actions were somewhere between criminally negligent behavior and absolute just reckless behavior. When you go through the police academy or when you handle any firearms at all, even as a kid, the first thing that you learn is some of these firearm safety rules. And the first safety rule is all guns are always loaded. Now, there's other firearm safety rules like never point the firearm at something that you're not intending to destroy. Keep your finger off the trigger until you are ready to fire. So there's all these different things. These basic, simple rules that I don't know if people take for granted, but this is an absolute horrible tragedy. A 23-year-old police officer was killed for absolutely nothing. Brian W. says this is basic firearm safety, tragic, 100% preventable. All at the same time. And I'm curious if people think that criminal charges are appropriate, even though there wasn't intent. I think so. I think that criminal charges are absolutely appropriate for a case like this because it's absolutely not an acceptable thing. So again, Lawson was charged with manslaughter with a firearm. We'll keep you updated about those criminal charges. There was another unfortunate death that happened. The death happened on December 7th, and this is actually going to be in Hillsborough, North Carolina. So this individual, he died December 1st, but the incident that I'm going to talk about, it actually goes back to like October. So on October 18th, there's an 83-year-old named Gary Razor. He's an 83-year-old, and he works at Home Depot. He works in the garden center of Home Depot. And what happened, and this happens a lot, is that when people want to shoplift and steal stuff, instead of going through because the garden center at Home Depot and Lowe's and all these places always has like a different entrance for the garden. A lot of people think that if they, want to steal things or shoplift, if they go out the garden entrance, that's a way for them to get away. That's a tactic that criminals often use when they're trying to shoplift from some of these big box like Home Depot type stores. Well, 83-year-old Gary Razor, he was working in the garden center when an individual, still unknown because he's not in custody, came by and he was trying to steal. He was pushing out a cart. They had about $800 worth of unpaid pressure washers, so he hadn't bought these. As the individual was pushing this out, this is on surveillance video, Gary Razor, he doesn't try to grab the guy. He doesn't stand in front of the cart, but as the guy is walking past him, he kind of sticks out his arm. As 83-year-old Gary Razor sticks out his arm, the offender just pushes him. He pushes him once, and the guy's 83 years old. He pushed him one time, Gary Razor fell. He fell. He was hospitalized. hospitalized. He suffered a mild heart attack at that point. He went into the hospital, and at one point it looked like he was recovering. However, on December 1st, he did tragically pass away. His wife went on the news a couple times and said, that they just wanted to travel and see their grandkids, and that he was actually planning to retire this coming winter. So this is an absolute tragic case. It happened in Hillsborough, North Carolina, and the individual still hasn't been caught. He still hasn't been caught. He still hasn't been identified. Now, of course, it's possible that the local police know who this individual is, but they just haven't said so yet. But definitely no one is in custody. The good thing about this is that because it happened at a Home Depot, Lowe's, all of these Walmart, all of these big box stores have loss prevention that have these networks that essentially talk to each other. So a lot of the times that, if there's a shoplifting or someone does a bunch of crimes at Home Depot or Lowe's, that, they all talk to each other and they all connect on different mediums, and they have meetings where they say, hey, this person came in, here's the pictures, anybody recognize them. And a lot of times that's how just these private companies are able to keep their own databases on people who commit crimes in their stores. So hopefully either through just the regular police resources or through the loss prevention at some of these stores, they can find out who this individual says. This is an absolute tragedy. And like I said, the offender is still out there. Another Florida story, and this one is really strange. And also I should say, because talking about some big box stores, so it was in the news the last couple of days that Walmart is actually, Walmart's losses, profit to loss statements have been so terrible, which has never been a thing for Walmart, that because they've been losing so much money to shoplifting, that they're actually consider closing several stores around the country, which typically isn't what you see from Walmart. So this is a problem pretty much all around the entire country. This next case also happened in Florida, and this is just a wacky case, is all I can say. So there's a Chicago cop, and I like to talk about Chicago stories because that's my hometown. That's where I'm originally from. But there's a Chicago cop. His name is Henry Capuch. Capouch, Capuch, I'm not sure. I like Capuch better. So Henry Capuch, he's a 30-year-old Chicago cop, and he went on vacation to Florida, like a lot of people in Illinois do, into Pinellas County, which is essentially near St. Pete's Beach. So while he's on vacation, he had an altercation at a bar. He went back to the hotel. The hotel also had a bar. So once he was there, for whatever reason, what he decided to do in the bar, because it's a hotel bar, they have an ice machine, just like they do in most hotels. For some reason, he decided to urinate in the hotel bar ice machine. While he's urinating in the hotel bar ice machine, people saw him. There's an on-duty security officer there who told him to stop. Other hotel employees told him to stop. There was a confrontation. So he didn't stop. He didn't apologize. He actually got into a physical altercation and a fight with security and with a hotel employee. Police were called, and he was arrested for 1 count of simple battery and disorderly conduct. He also resisted arrest with the police officer. So that's an off-duty Chicago cop just trying to have some fun in Florida, and that is an absolutely ridiculous story. I've never heard of someone urinating in an ice machine in public at a hotel bar. That doesn't make any sense at all. It looks like he was a 5-year veteran with the Chicago Police Department, and so my guess is if he hasn't been terminated yet, that's coming down the pipe when there is an internal investigation on this particular case. A couple other cases, there are things that I want to talk about. They're in the news, is everybody's favorite Jeremy DeWitt. So Jeremy DeWitt, just like we talked about last week. So Jeremy was, Brian W. says this happens in California on a daily basis. Yes, but Brian, does it usually involve off-duty police officers? Okay, so Jeremy DeWitt, he was released from jail. We went over that a couple weeks ago, and he's out, right? And for whatever reason, he didn't do his whole sentence. I think there was like 3 or 4 months left on his sentence, but the judge let him out. So now the judge still has, and the system essentially still has control over Mr. DeWitt until the end of his sentence, what it would be. I think it's like, 3 or 4 months or so. So all Jeremy had to do was comply with this list of conditions in order to get out of jail. A couple of those things are that, you probably can't drink alcohol, you can't do any illegal drugs, you can't go into a bar, you can't contact anyone who was involved in whatever the underlying case is. And one of the things that the judge in the court wanted Jeremy DeWitt to do was to delete his YouTube channel. For whatever reason, he didn't. He says he can't delete it because someone hacked it or something to that effect. Either way, here he is. He's finally free after just about a year and a half or so, 16 months. He's free, but he got arrested again. So he was arrested again for not shutting down his YouTube channel. Well, a couple days ago, he went before the judge again. And it's at this point that you can essentially plead your case, where you can say to the judge, hey, I know that your attorney, hopefully, hey, I know that I violated this condition, but there's actually mitigating circumstances around it. So in Jeremy's situation, you would think that he would be able to say something to the effect of, hey, listen, here's the 6 emails I sent to YouTube and Google trying to get access to this back. And here, look, they're telling me that someone else owns it now. Like, judge, I literally can't do anything with this. So this is a condition that I physically can't meet. However, he didn't do that. No one believed him, so they sent him back to jail. So he was essentially denied probation. He's back in jail. Now, he does have another hearing on January 23rd of 23. So he has, from now until January 23rd, so that's what, 5 or 6 weeks, he has to think about, some content for his YouTube show as soon as he gets out. But, for the next 5 or 6 weeks, he's going to be in jail, and then maybe he'll get out January 23rd and do more silly things that we can go ahead and talk about and share the video with. So those were the main cases that I wanted to talk about. And the last piece of news that I wanted to get to today, and this is something that was so shocking, so surprising, that I know a lot of people still can't believe it. The Liver King is not natural. So it's been Derek from More Plates, More Dates. It's a YouTube channel. He found he was given emails where the Liver King, if anyone's familiar with the Liver King, has been doing about $10,000 to $12,000 worth of steroids. A lot of people think that the Liver King actually outed himself in order to kind of cap his podcast tour with an episode on the Joe Rogan show. However, Joe Rogan said that the whole thing is stupid, and he has declined to have the Liver King on. But that was the last piece of news that I wanted to talk about. Let's see what kind of comments we got. Let's see. Living life like Jerry. I was just going to mention John Mina and the whole corruption thing involving OCSU, Orange County, if I got that right. Okay, thank you. Sergeant George shaking his head. My guess is you're shaking your head either about Jeremy DeWitt or about the off-duty Chicago police officer who was urinating in a hotel bar ice machine. Let's see. Brian W., you mean you can't get that yolk naturally? You're kidding. Yeah. And listen, here's the most ridiculous thing about the Liver King is that, he gave an apology. And what he said is that, the reason why he didn't come clean earlier is because and this is so self-important. He said that his message is for young men who might commit suicide. And that if it came out that he was on steroids, that these otherwise just, suicidal men who are somehow hanging on every word that the Liver King says, they're just all going to kill themselves if they find out that he isn't natural. But listen to how crazy that is. So if you really are trying to talk to young men and your concern is that, some of them might be suicidal, why are you promoting a physique that you can literally only attain by steroids? So when these people, you're not telling them to take steroids, when they're doing all of the other things that the Liver King said, and they're still not achieving those results, but you see the Liver King has those results because he's on steroids, and you think that's somehow going to make these people otherwise just not commit suicide? I mean, the whole thing doesn't make any sense. Let's see. Sergeant George hasn't heard anything about the Liver King. Well, what I said about him is probably all you need to know, but he's absolutely ridiculous. Last piece of advice is don't eat the yellow ice cubes at a hotel bar in Florida. So that's going to be our show for today. I want to thank everybody for coming in and watching and for giving us some comments. Just to make sure that you go ahead and go watch that video on our channel about the police chief in Tampa Bay. Let us know what you think in the comments on that video to see if you think that her actions were way out of the line or not. And definitely go ahead and subscribe to our channel if you haven't already. And I hope everyone has a great and safe weekend.